Beloved child, I see that you have been listening for movements on the outside to confirm that something new is beginning. You look around for noise, for signs, for events, for a turn large enough that you can say to yourself, "This is it." But I tell you that the new season I am leading you into does not need to impress. It does not require echoes, disruption, or you're standing up to make declarations for the world to see. I begin with stillness, because only in stillness can you hear the true rhythm of your own soul. You have grown accustomed to measuring change by volume, by speed, by sensations of excitement or fear. And so when I do not work that way, you become uncertain. You wonder whether I am slowing down, or whether you have lost the rhythm. Yet it is precisely in the moment when the familiar noise fades that I am adjusting the inner pressure within you. Like a skilled craftsman, lowering it gradually so the body does not go into shock. You wake up on an ordinary morning, with nothing remarkable to report, and yet something inside you is different, not because all problems have disappeared, but because they no longer press on your chest as they once did. This quiet makes you doubt, for you have learned to believe that what is good must be loud, while silence often feels like emptiness or abandonment. I leave you in that still space long enough for you to realize that it is not my absence, but a deeper presence where I no longer need to compete with other voices to be heard. You begin to notice a very strange sign of the new season, and it does not excite you immediately. You stop splitting yourself in two. Before, even the smallest decision pulled you in opposite directions, one part wanting to move forward, another afraid of losing what was familiar. You stood in the middle, torn, persuading yourself, arguing within yourself, exhausting yourself, often worn out before you ever took a step. I saw the long inner dialogues, the times you tried to prove that your decisions were right, not only to others, but to yourself. Yet, in this new climate, you begin to choose without having to defend yourself until you are breathless. You stop explaining yourself at length. You stop replaying old scripts in your mind. You stop dragging the past out as a counterweight every time you face something new. This change is so gentle that you almost miss it, but it carries weight. It is quiet, yet firm. You breathe more deeply without trying. You put your phone down earlier without needing a reason. You say yes or no with a kind, gentle clarity, without the familiar burden of guilt. I tell you that this is the sign of a new season, not because you have become stronger, but because I have gathered you back into one, so that you no longer tear yourself apart whenever you live honestly in the direction I am leading you. There are moments when this stillness touches your pride. You once believed you were mature enough, knowledgeable enough, spiritual enough to be ready for whatever circumstances I might give you. So when I say that before changing the scene, I must change the climate within you. It feels like I am touching something you would rather not see. You want the circumstances to change first, and then you will adjust. You want the new home, the new job, the new relationship, trusting that everything inside will settle on its own. But I know that if the old climate remains, you will carry it into every new space and turn even good gifts into burdens. I do not accuse you of this. I simply show you a truth you had not paused to face. Like a new house that still smells of dampness. Like windows opening onto a beautiful view while the air inside remains stifling. You would not be able to enjoy what I give if you continue to breathe through the old system. I tell you that I am renewing your mind not to make you someone unfamiliar, but to return you to the rhythm I set from the beginning. Just as it is written, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. so that you may discern what is good, what is pleasing, what is complete in what I have prepared for you. When you grasp this, a very real sorrow passes through your heart, sorrow for the years you spent running fast in a climate not meant for life. And at the same time, a quiet hope begins to grow, because you realize that if I have loved you enough to change the climate within you, then every place I lead you into afterward will no longer be somewhere you must strain to survive, but a place where you can live, breathe, and remain. The stillness I place upon you does not make you stop. It brings you back into rhythm. In that rhythm, you are no longer driven by the fear of missing out, nor pulled by old memories. You begin to sense more clearly the boundary between what I am leading and what you have merely grown used to, not through loud voices, but through a small, steady light enough for each step. You may not yet see the circumstances change, but the climate already has. You walk the same familiar roads, face the same people, do the same tasks, yet your reactions are no longer the same. That is because I have begun on the inside, where no one sees, where there is no applause, but where all truth is reset. And from that place, the new season is opening quietly, unhurriedly, yet firmly like ground after rain has settled, ready to bear whatever I will continue to build in your life. I want you to look more closely at this very fragile moment, where you are beginning to stop splitting yourself, something you have not yet dared to name. It does not happen as a grand decision. There is no vow, no date to mark on a calendar. It happens silently, in small choices that once drained you. There were days when you spent hours arguing with yourself whether to act or not, to step forward or wait, to speak or stay silent. Each question brought a chain of assumptions, fears of being misunderstood, judged, or left behind. You lived torn in two, and you mistook that state for depth, for responsibility, for maturity. But I tell you that it was the sign of an unhealthy climate, where your soul had to sit in judgment over itself every day. When the new season begins, I do not make you strong by adding pressure. I make you whole again. You begin to choose without prolonged self-justification. You no longer need to set up a courtroom in your mind to prove that you are allowed to live truthfully. And that is what makes you feel both light and afraid, because you have grown used to being tired. There was a deep tension lodged in your body that you could not name. It sat on your shoulders when you woke, in your jaw as you listened to others speak, in your chest whenever you had to decide. You thought it came from circumstances, from responsibility, from things beyond your control. But I show you that much of that tension came from carrying two roles at once, the person you wanted to become, and the person you believed you had to be in order to be accepted. When I change the climate within you, I begin by loosening that tension. You breathe more deeply without reminding yourself to breathe. You rest your hand on the table and notice it no longer trembles as it once did. You sit quietly for a few minutes without needing to fill the space with sound or thought. This is not stagnation. It is the sign of an inner system being recalibrated so that you no longer have to force yourself to live in two conflicting rhythms. I tell you that when you stop splitting yourself, you do not lose depth, you recover your center. This new certainty does not make you rigid, it softens you in a different way. You begin to realize that you can say no without building a wall, and say yes without sacrificing a piece of your soul for temporary peace. Before, every choice left behind a residue of regret, a sense that you had betrayed yourself or betrayed someone else. Now you choose and remain with that choice, not because it is perfect, but because it no longer tears you in two. I call this gentle certainty. It is not loud, not performative, and it does not demand immediate recognition. Yet it stands firm when old voices try to pull you back. You do not need to push them away. You simply do not follow them anymore. This is a kind of strength you were never taught, because before, you only knew the strength of bracing yourself. When I say that I change the climate within you before I change your circumstances, I know that this touches a place you would rather avoid. You once hoped that if the situation shifted quickly enough, you would not have to look at the old patterns still living inside you. You believed that a new environment would automatically produce a new self, but I see clearly that if the air within you remains heavy, you will carry it into every room, every relationship, every opportunity. You may renovate the exterior, yet still live under a pressure that exhausts the soul. I do not want that for you. I did not lead you through years of waiting and healing, only for you to repeat the same kind of depletion in a more beautiful setting. So I slowed the pace, and that slowness unsettled you. You wondered why I did not open doors faster, why I did not change your circumstances more decisively. But I am doing a more delicate work, changing the way you breathe in life. You begin to see this through very ordinary reactions. Things that once ignited you or brought you crashing down now pass by like a light breeze, not because you have grown numb, but because the inner climate no longer sustains those old responses. You no longer need to react in order to survive. You can remain at rest within yourself without feeling threatened. I tell you, this is a sign that I am renewing your mind, not by loading it with new ideas, but by dismantling the patterns that kept you living in constant defense. Gradually, you learn to distinguish between the urgency of fear and my gentle leading. And in that discernment, you begin to trust that the new season is not a place you must run toward, but a state into which you are being led. The sorrow you feel when you realize this is real. You grieve the times you forced yourself forward, the years you lived in a climate that was never meant for life, while blaming yourself for not being strong enough. I do not let you sink into that grief. I allow it to pass like a brief rain, softening the ground for hope. For in the very moment you understand that I have been working from within, you also understand that I have never been impatient with you. I do not need you to arrive in a new circumstance to prove that I am with you. I am present in this quiet, in the deeper breathing, in the choices that no longer tear you in two. From this foundation, everything I will later lead you into will no longer feel like a burden, but like space that is sufficiently whole for you to live fully, not as one who is striving, but as one who has rediscovered their own climate. I need you to remain a little longer with this wounded pride, not allowing it to turn into self-protection, nor letting it pass as a clever idea. When I say that before I change your circumstances, I change the climate within you. I am not speaking to make you feel lacking, but to help you see that I am working at a depth beyond what you ever asked for. You have grown accustomed to praying for visible change, a door opening, a clear turn, a different situation in which you might finally breathe. But I know that if I were to change only the setting without changing the climate, you would step into the new place, breathing the same old way, carrying the same familiar tension, governed by the same reactive system that exhausted you before. You would then believe the problem lay in the circumstances and continue running. I am not calling you into a new season so that you can move faster. I am calling you so that you can live differently. There is something very subtle you begin to notice as your inner climate shifts. You no longer use circumstances to define the state of your soul. Before, even a small external disturbance was enough to throw you into inner chaos. a word, a message, a delay, a look that fell short of expectation, any of these could make you doubt your worth, your direction, even me. You lived as though your soul had to respond to every change in outside pressure. But now, as I lower the pressure from within, you begin to see that circumstances may remain unresolved, yet they no longer have authority over your inner climate. You can stand amid uncertainty without being pulled into spirals of speculation. You can remain in waiting without condemning yourself as delayed or failed. I tell you, this is a quiet miracle, because it does not alter what you see, but it completely changes how you are present within what you see. The comparison between a new house and old air becomes very real to you. You understand that you could move into a space that is larger, brighter, more comfortable. Yet if the air inside is still dense with old fears, you would shut the windows, draw the curtains, and live constricted within that very house. You would protect yourself from the gift I have given. I do not want you to live that way. I want you to be able to dwell in goodness without defense, to receive without strain, to move forward without measuring every step in fear of loss. That is why I patiently do this work of changing the climate. Even when you think it is too slow, I know your restlessness, because you have waited long enough to see something unmistakably change. But I tell you that lasting clarity always begins within, where no one else but you and I know what is taking place. You begin to experience hope, not because everything has become settled, but because you are no longer threatened by what remains unsettled. Before, anything unfinished tightened you, as though you were living inside a prolonged mistake. Now, you can look at what is incomplete without panic. You understand that I am working according to my order, and that order does not wound your soul. When I speak of renewing the mind, I am not referring to thinking more positively or believing more forcefully. I am speaking of learning to see all things from a new climate, where truth does not need to be pushed forward by effort. You gradually realize that many thoughts which once drained you were not wisdom at all, but reflexes of a soul that lived too long in defense. As I dismantle those reflexes, you feel both empty and light, as though you are relearning how to stand within yourself. The hope that rises here is not the hope that everything will quickly improve, but the hope that no matter the pace at which things unfold, you will no longer lose yourself. You see that I am not rushing you into a new circumstance because I am protecting what I intend to build upon that new foundation. I do not want you to enter what is good carrying the same exhaustion that caused you to collapse in previous seasons. So I remain with you in this quiet, in this steadier breathing, in these days that offer nothing to boast about but so much to live. You do not yet need to name this new season, simply remain within it. The climate is changing, and from this settled ground, you will step into what I have prepared not as one struggling to keep balance, but as one who has been reset from within. I set you again before a truth you have avoided for a very long time, from very early on. You learned to measure yourself by speed. You grew accustomed to hearing questions no one was actually asking you. Questions you asked yourself every day. Why am I not there yet? Why am I not finished? Why am I still here? And each time, a quiet but persistent wave of shame rose within you, as if something were wrong with you because you did not move as fast as others, because you had not reached the milestones you believed you should have reached. I tell you that this is not how I name you. I have never bound your identity to speed. I did not place you on a racetrack to see who arrives first. You belong to me, and because you belong to me, my leading does not carry panic. I do not drive you forward with pressure. I do not crowd you with the fear of being left behind. I do not pull you ahead with urgent calls. I lead you with peace, because only in peace are you steady enough to go far. You did not realize how long you had been living under that subtle pressure. It was not loud, but it constantly whispered that you had to be a little faster. Try a little harder. Surpass yourself one more time to be worthy. And when you were tired, you blamed yourself for being tired. When you were slow, you felt ashamed of being slow. I come near you, not with a push, but with a very different gesture. I place my hand on your shoulder, not to drive you, but to hold you. That hand does not carry a crushing weight, it carries presence. It tells you that you are in the right place to be led, that you do not need to run to prove anything. In the moment you sense that hand, something in you softens. The familiar shame begins to dissolve. Like a thin mist meeting the sun. You no longer have to brace yourself defensively. You no longer have to lean forward as if slowing down would make you fall. I set you upright, because the ground you are standing on is me. I want you to clearly distinguish between pressure and peace, because these two cannot lead you together. Pressure always makes you feel that if you stop, everything will collapse. Peace lets you know that even if you pause for a beat, you are still being held. Pressure makes your breath shallow, your shoulders tense, your mind always running ahead of your body. Peace deepens your breathing, lowers your shoulders, allows you to be within yourself without constant vigilance. I do not call you with a loud shout, nor do I use comparison to provoke you into motion. I call you by your name, at a rhythm just enough for you to hear without panic. And when you turn back, you realize that your strength does not lie in how fast you move, but in whether you remain in trust, in stillness and trust. Your strength is reset, not the strength of striving, but the strength of knowing you are being led. There are times you think I am absent simply because I am not loud. You have grown used to associating my presence with clear moments, strong movements, sensations you can immediately name. So when life enters days that are very ordinary, very even, with little outward change, you begin to feel forgotten. You wake up, do familiar tasks, move through hours without a climax, and within you arises a quiet ache. Is something happening that I cannot see? I tell you that it is precisely in the place where no one applauds that I am working most deeply. I do not need spotlights to touch your soul. I do not need an audience to reshape the inner layers that only you and I know. I work in how you respond to small things, in the breath you keep when no one is watching, in your honesty with yourself when there is nothing to display. The loneliness you feel in those days is not imagined. It is real, and I do not dismiss it. But I want you to know that silence is not emptiness. Silence is the space where I move in deeper, where I do not have to compete with other voices to be heard. You begin to realize that in those very ordinary days, your heart is no longer as dry as it once was. There is a gentle warmth there, not coming from an event, but from the fact that you no longer have to keep asking whether you are on the right path. I am there like a steady current, keeping your soul from cracking. And when you grasp this paradox that silence itself is my activity and the ache within you slowly dissolves, giving way to a quiet gratitude, I tell you that a new season does not begin with running away from the present. You have grown used to using the future as a refuge, thinking that once you reach some point ahead, you will finally be able to breathe. But I meet you at the step that is lit, not at the end of the road. I do not require you to know the entire route. I only ask you to be faithful to the light shining at your feet. You worry because you fear that if you stay with the present, you will become stuck. But I tell you that the present is not a prison, it is a meeting place. I have placed my light there. Enough for one step, no more, no less. When you choose to trust this light, you do not need to run. You step forward, and in each step you realize that I was already there, waiting for you, not to push you, but to walk with you in peace, not under pressure. I want you to remain a little longer with this silence, not to endure it, but to learn how to read what I am doing within it. You have grown accustomed to thinking that when I am present, something must happen clearly enough that you do not have to doubt. You are used to moments when emotions are heightened, when faith is activated by strong signals. Therefore, when life moves into days that are very ordinary, very even, with little surface change, you begin to think, I have withdrawn. You look around and see no striking signs, hear no clear calling, and within you arises a very hidden loneliness. You do not say it aloud, but you wonder whether you are living on the margins of something important, whether I am working with others while you are being overlooked. I tell you that this is a very human misunderstanding, and I want to correct it at the root. I do not measure my work by how visible it is. I do not need applause to confirm that what I am doing is real. The deepest part of transformation always happens where no one is watching, where there is no audience, where there is only me and your soul. You have grown used to judging a day as meaningful or meaningless based on whether there is something notable to recount. But I see your days by a different measure. I look at how you breathe, how you respond, how you stay with uncomfortable emotions without trying to escape them. I look at your honesty in the hours when no one is checking. It is precisely there, in the ordinary days you think are empty, that I am doing my deepest work. The sense of small hurt you feel is not a sign of weak faith. It is a sign that you have grown used to living on stimulation. When there are no longer emotional peaks to cling to, you feel as though you are falling into a void, but I am not letting you fall. I am simply removing some of the noise so you can hear the true rhythm. Silence is not a space of my withdrawal. Silence is the space where I enter layers you have never allowed me to touch before. When there are no longer grand signs for you to rely on, you begin to learn how to recognize me in very small movements, in an unexpected calm when facing something that once made you panic, in a patience emerging where you did not expect it, in the fact that you no longer need to constantly ask whether you are on the right path. I am at work in the days when you do not post, do not share, do not prove anything. I am at work in the mornings when you wake up and there is nothing particular to look forward to, yet your heart no longer feels as heavy as it once did. I am at work in the hours when you quietly do your part, unseen and unacknowledged, yet your soul is no longer torn apart. You do not notice it immediately, because you have grown used to believing that what truly matters must create a strong sensation. But little by little, you begin to sense a very gentle warmth rising within you, not excitement, but steadiness. That warmth does not come from circumstances. It comes from no longer feeling abandoned within your own life. I want you to understand this paradox. Silence is activity, not the activity of busyness, but the activity of alignment. When you do not hear me speak loudly, I am adjusting the foundation, lowering old pressures, dismantling reflexes that have kept you living in defense for far too long. You once believed that if I was not speaking, you had to figure things out on your own. But in this new climate, you are learning that you do not have to guess in the silence. You can remain there, breathe, and trust that I am still at work, even when you have no emotional evidence to cling to. This makes you feel both empty and afraid, because you are accustomed to living on constant confirmation. Yet it is precisely in that emptiness that I am teaching you a new way of trusting, one not built on feeling, but on relationship. There are days when you look back and see nothing clearly changed, and then you realize that what has changed is how you are present within what has not changed. You no longer react as hastily as before. You no longer feel compelled to fill every silence with thoughts or sound. You can sit with yourself without discomfort driving you to escape. This is not numbness. It is a sign that your soul is being re-stabilized. I am placing you into a rhythm where you no longer depend on noise to know that you are alive. You begin to live from the inside, rather than waiting for external life to activate you. I know there are moments when you wish I would do something clearer, stronger, so you would not have to remain in this ambiguity. But I tell you this, the clarity you are seeking will not come from a dramatic turn, but from the durability of days that have nothing to show. If you remain long enough in this silence, you will discover that it is not empty. It is full of me. And when you realize this, the initial loneliness will give way to a warmth that is real, human, and deep. You will understand that I never left you. I simply stopped making noise so you would no longer confuse my voice with other voices. I tell you that a new season does not begin when you run faster, but when you stop running away from the moment in which you are standing. You have learned to use the future as a very subtle refuge. Whenever the present does not resemble what you hoped for, you turn your gaze forward and tell yourself that if you just go a little farther, if you just change environments one more time, you will be fine. But I see clearly what you have not noticed. The more you run from the present, the more you lose your capacity to live. You exist on prediction, on anxiety, on scenarios that have not yet happened, while the ground beneath your feet remains unattended. I am not calling you into a new season so you can continue living that way. I am calling you to stay, to live in your true rhythm, right where you are, within the portion of light that is already given. You feel anxious when you hear this, because your present is not yet beautiful, not yet clear, not yet complete. There are parts you do not want to look at, questions you do not yet have answers for, things you wish you had already moved past but that are still there. You fear that if you stop to remain in the present, you will be stuck forever in this in-between state. But I tell you, the present is not a prison. It is a meeting place. I did not place you here to punish you for not having gone far enough. I placed you here because at this very point, I have something to give you. Not a distant vision, not the entire road, but light sufficient for the next step. I do not ask you to see everything in order to believe. I simply invite you to trust enough to place your foot down. The light I give is not blinding. It does not overwhelm you or make you feel exceptional or superior. It is gentle, low, and very close to the ground. It illuminates exactly where you need to step, no more, no less. You have been used to thinking that if light does not reach far, it is not enough. But I tell you that light sufficient for one step is the light of relationship, not the light of control. When you demand to see the entire path, you are seeking safety and foreknowledge. When you accept light for one step, you are placing your safety in my hands. And that difference is profound. Even if outwardly it looks like you are simply slowing down, you shrink whenever you do not know what will happen next. That is a reflex you learned through many seasons of insecurity. But in this new climate, I do not condemn you for that reflex. I simply remain long enough for you to realize that you no longer need to shrink. You can relax your shoulders, unclench your jaw, release your hurried breathing. I am not standing at the end of the road waiting for you to run toward me. I am standing right at the step you are about to take. When you dare to remain with this moment, even though it is incomplete, you begin to sense something unfamiliar. The anxiety does not disappear immediately, but it no longer governs you. It is present, but it is not steering. You step forward not because you are no longer afraid, but because you have chosen to trust within the fear. I know you once believed that faithfulness meant doing more, trying harder, sacrificing more, but in this season, faithfulness takes a different form. Faithfulness is staying with the step that is illuminated, not abandoning it to chase imagined steps far ahead. Faithfulness is doing today's portion without borrowing strength from tomorrow. Faithfulness is not despising the present simply because it does not yet resemble the promise. When you live this way, you do not feel more heroic, but you feel more real. You no longer have to perform the role of the strong one. You allow yourself to be someone who is being led. And in that allowance, I have room to act. There is a very quiet peace that settles in when you stop running. You begin to realize that I have been walking with you the entire way. You were simply too busy looking ahead to notice. I did not arrive after you had enough faith. I was there before you had time to doubt. As you remain with the step that is illuminated, you see that I am not rushing you, not irritated, not disappointed that you are not moving faster. I walk with you at a steady pace, the pace of trust, and that pace gradually overtakes the old frantic rhythm within you. You do not need to feel strong in order to step. You only need to step. Every such step, however small, is illuminated. You do not need to know the entire path in order not to lose your way. I am the light for your feet, not a map for you to control the journey. When you understand this, a very deep peace begins to settle within you. Not the peace of everything being resolved, but the peace of knowing that you are walking in the light, even if that light is only enough for one step. While the night is still long, and it is within this peace that your new season is opening, not with noise, not with pressure, but with the gentle faithfulness of each step you place down with me. I need you to look straight at your weariness this time, not as something to push through, but as a sign that is telling the truth. You have grown accustomed to explaining your exhaustion by the volume of tasks, by the weight of responsibility, by circumstances that do not allow you to rest. But I tell you that you are not tired only because there is much to do. There are those who do more than you and are not as depleted. Your weariness comes from a deeper climate, the climate of self-justification. You work not only to complete what is required, but to avoid being judged. You move forward not only because you love what you are doing, but because you fear that if you stop, you will be seen as not enough. And after living long in that climate, your soul no longer knows how to rest, even when your body has already lain down. I see the nights when you turn off the light and sleep does not come. Your body has stopped, but your mind keeps running. You replay what you have done, what you have said, the choices you have made, and you ask yourself whether you did enough, whether you did it right, whether someone is thinking something about you even now. You call this responsibility, carefulness, maturity, but I call it a soul living under constant scrutiny. Even when no one is watching, you carry that invisible observer into the very places that should have been the safest. And so, even when everything is right, the right task, the right role, the right standard, your heart remains heavy. What is right does not equal freedom when that rightness is driven by fear. There is a deeply uncomfortable moment when you begin to realize this, because it makes you feel exposed. You can no longer soothe yourself by saying that you are tired only because of circumstances. You see that there is a part of you that has always been working under a judging light, and that part has never rested. When this truth touches you, you tense up. You want to argue. You want to say that if you do not push yourself this way, you will fall behind, be overlooked, lose your place. You feel ashamed when you realize that many things you have called devotion are, in fact, sustained by the fear of not being recognized. I am not saying this to condemn you. I am saying it so you may understand. Because only when something is named rightly can weariness begin to heal. I tell you that there is a very real difference between working out of fear and working out of love. Even if they look similar on the outside, working from fear always pulls you forward in tension, keeps you at a distance from yourself, keeps you living in a state of vigilance. Working from love gives you the ability to be present, gives you a quiet joy even when no one notices. When you work from fear, you need results to prove that you are worthy. When you work from love, the work itself is enough. You have lived too long in the climate of pleasing others, to the point that you have mistaken it for faithfulness. But I ask you, and I ask you plainly, whom are you trying to please? When you let that question rest in your heart, you begin to see how much pressure has been governing you. I do not deny that you have responsibilities. I am not calling you to a life of abandonment, but I have never called you to live by the fear of being evaluated. You were not created to be a project that must continually prove its value. You belong to me before you do anything at all. When you forget this, the inner climate becomes harsh. It allows no mistakes, no slowness, no weakness. And living in that climate, you may do many things correctly, but you will never feel light. I tell you that your weariness is a prayer you have not yet known how to name, a cry to step out of a system that has taken much from you without returning life. As I speak this to you, I see you soften, not because everything is resolved, but because you feel understood. You no longer have to defend your weariness. You no longer need to pretend that you are better than you truly are. I am there not as a voice demanding that you do better, but as a presence that allows you to admit that you have lived too long in the climate of self-justification, and simply having it named rightly has already begun to lighten your heart. You are not yet out of the old climate, but you have seen the door, and that is the beginning of how I will lead you forward, not by adding burdens, but by changing the air you breathe each day. I continue to lead you deeper into that old climate, not so you will blame yourself, but so you will understand why. Even when many things in your life are right, you still feel heavy. You have grown used to living in an atmosphere that constantly whispers that you must be faster, better, more proving in order to be safe. That voice is not always loud, but it is urgent. It does not allow you to rest with something completed. It pulls you into the next task before your heart has time to breathe. It teaches you to call peace laziness, rest weakness, stopping regression, and because you have listened to it for so long, you have assumed it is the truth. I tell you that I am correcting the way you name life. There are familiar inner dialogues that run through your mind without you noticing anymore. When you sit and do nothing for a few minutes, a voice rises. Why are you sitting there? Why not use the time to do more when you feel light? Another voice interrupts. Be careful, too much ease is dangerous. When you want to rest, you hear, if you rest now, who will still respect you? You think this is alertness, responsibility, motivation, But I tell you, it is the noise of a climate that has taught you to distrust stillness. You have not realized that you have learned to live as if only tension proves that you are living rightly. So, when peace knocks, your first reflex is suspicion. I see your resistance when you hear this. You want to say that without that driving voice, you would become careless, lose direction, stop moving forward. You fear that if I remove the urgency, you will lose motivation. I do not rush to argue with you. I simply stay and show you another truth. Some of those who went the farthest in Scripture did not walk by pressure, but by trust. Do you remember Elijah after the fire, after the great wind, after the earthquake? I was not in the noise. I came in a gentle, quiet whisper. Yet people always want me in the thunder, because thunder makes them feel certain that something is happening. The quiet voice requires them to listen, to remain, to trust without stimulation. I tell you that the old climate feeds not only on noise outside, but on noise within. It causes you to equate tension with faithfulness, exhaustion with sacrifice, sleeplessness with responsibility. And when you live long with these misnamings, your body learns them too. You startle when your phone vibrates. Your jaw tightens when a message arrives late. You struggle to relax even when no one is demanding anything. I do not blame you for this. I simply show you that your soul has grown accustomed to living on alert. So when I begin to lower the noise, when I let you taste a little quiet, your body does not yet trust it. It assumes that calm means danger, and that is why you feel anxious even in peace. I am teaching you a new language. In this language, peace is not laziness, it is a sign of safety. Rest is not a lack of faith, it is the fruit of trust. Stopping is not giving up, it is choosing not to be driven by fear. As I correct the way you name things, you begin to soften. You do not fully believe yet, but you no longer resist as fiercely as before. You try breathing a little deeper. You try sitting still a little longer. And in those very small attempts, you begin to realize that the world does not collapse when you are not in a hurry. I see a very gentle lightness beginning to pass through you. It is not the lightness of excitement, but the lightness of no longer having to stay tense all the time. You begin to distinguish what is driven by love and what is pushed by fear. When you act from fear, your spirit dries up quickly. When you act from love, even in weariness, there is still life within you. I tell you that I am not taking away your passion. I am separating it from the noise that has distorted it. I am not calling you into a passive life. I am calling you into a guided life, where your pace is no longer dictated by panic. You do not need to change all your habits at once. I am not forcing you to believe fully in a single day. I am simply inviting you to pay attention, to notice how urgency tightens you, to notice how peace unsettles you, and to let me remain with you in both. When you allow me to stay with you in that in-between space, you will slowly realize that the new climate does not drain your strength. It returns to you a different kind of strength, the strength of one who no longer has to run in order to be allowed to live. And in that lightness, you begin to believe that a new season does not need to be loud to be real. It needs enough stillness for your soul to survive and grow. I want you to look directly at the quiet fear rising within you when I say that if you carry the old climate into the new season, you will turn grace into a burden. That fear is not loud, but it is real. You are afraid that if you slow down, if you stop straining, if you no longer drive yourself the way you once did, you will lose what you have waited so long for. You fear that grace only comes to those who are strong enough, tough enough, relentless enough to withstand pressure. And so, even as I begin to open something new, you unconsciously carry forward the old way of breathing, the old reactions, the old self-forcing. I tell you that this is what exhausts you, not because grace is heavy, but because the inner climate has not yet changed. You never considered that grace itself can break a person if it is received through a system that no longer fits. You have seen it, and perhaps you have lived it. Good things arrive. Opportunities open. Responsibilities increase, and instead of feeling upheld, you feel crushed. Not because what I give is wrong, but because you are trying to carry it with the same bracing that helped you survive the old season. I do not want you to enter the new season that way. I do not call you out of drought only for you to die of excess. So before I let you receive more, I must change the pressure within you, like a diver being brought up slowly so the body does not rupture from too sudden a shift. I am doing something very strange compared to how you once understood breakthrough. I am not speeding things up, I am lowering the pressure. I am not provoking you to run, I am teaching you to breathe. I am not making you strong by adding weight, I am making you steady by changing how you stand. This frightens you, because you have learned to believe that if you are not tense, you will not move forward. But I tell you, there is a way of moving ahead that does not require haste, and it is this way that brings you to the right place. This paradox confuses you, slow enough to arrive. You are not used to it, so you doubt. Yet I remain with you in that doubt. Without withdrawing and without forcing, you begin to understand, little by little, that the old climate did not only tire you, it also distorted how you receive what is good. When you live long under tension, you start to think peace is a sign of danger. When you live long in defense, you believe openness is vulnerability. And when you live long in self-justification, you think receiving without pressure is impossible. I am dismantling these confusions not through argument, but through very slow experience. You try receiving something small without bracing. You try living through a good day without fearing it will soon disappear. You try doing something good without asking whether anyone noticed. Each time, the inner pressure lowers a little, and you do not break. I see the moment you begin to understand, not with your mind, but with your body. You notice that when you stop forcing yourself, your heartbeat becomes steadier. When you stop driving yourself, your breath grows deeper. When you stop placing yourself under an invisible gaze, you can receive without trembling. The initial fear that you would lose everything if you stopped straining begins to dissolve. You see that it is precisely when you stop straining that you become capable of holding what I give. This surprises you, because it runs contrary to everything you learned in order to survive. I tell you that a new season is not measured by how much grace you receive, but by your ability to remain within grace without destroying yourself. I am not rushing you into abundance, because I am teaching you how to carry it. I am not rushing to show you everything, because I am resetting the foundation. You do not need to fear missing out. You do not miss out when you move in the rhythm I set. You only miss out when you try to carry what is new with an old system. And that is what I am preventing, not to keep you small, but to protect you from collapsing under the very thing you have asked me for. As you begin to trust this, a very different kind of peace enters you. Not the peace that comes from everything being clear, but the peace of knowing that I am holding the rhythm. You no longer have to guess whether you are strong enough for the new season. I know. I am the one leading you in, and I do not lead you where you cannot stand. I lower the pressure not to weaken you, but so that you can endure what I am about to give. And in that steadiness, You begin to see that the new season is not as frightening as you once imagined. When the climate within you has been changed, you do not need to see everything in order to believe. You only need to recognize that I am working carefully, slowly, lovingly, so that when what is new arrives, you will not have to curl inward to endure it, but can open your hands to receive. That is why I change the climate before I change the circumstances, not because I am delaying you, but because I want you still standing when what I have promised begins to unfold. I want you to pause right at this very strange reflex, the one that unsettles you even though there is no clear threat present. When stillness begins to spread inside, you feel anxious, as though something in the system has gone wrong. You are used to your soul being tense, alert, always ready to react. So when the familiar alarms fall silent, you do not know what to do with the emptiness. You wonder whether you are becoming careless, whether you have missed a danger, whether you are unprepared for something bad that is coming. I tell you that nothing is wrong. What is happening is that your soul is beginning to stop standing guard. The part of you that lived too long in a state of alarm is being allowed to lower its weapons. And this lowering frightens you, because you have learned to believe that only tension keeps you safe. I see very clearly the small signs you have not yet named. You no longer startle every time your phone vibrates. You read a message more slowly before replying. You no longer feel your chest tighten at the presence of silence. You can sit quietly for a few minutes without needing to fill the space with sound or thought. These changes are not loud, but they touch something very deep within you. And because they touch so deep, you do not call them peace, you call them abnormal. I name what is happening for you so that you will not panic. Your body is relearning the sensation of safety. Your soul is learning that not every silence signals danger. I am healing the part of you that has always been on guard, the part that kept you alive through harsh seasons, but no longer needs to remain constantly active now. The vague tension you feel when peace arrives is not a sign that you are going the wrong way. It is a sign that you are stepping out of an old climate. You have lived so long in a state of readiness, always braced to respond, that when I allow you to rest in peace, your old system does not yet trust it. It waits for the next shock. It waits for a reason to snap back into action. I do not blame you for this. I remain long enough for that part of you to realize that it no longer has to work the way it once did. And when that part is named correctly, the tension within you begins to soften. You no longer have to question yourself simply because you are no longer panicking. I tell you that you do not need a dramatic shift to prove that I am at work. You have grown accustomed to thinking that if I were truly acting, you would see a sharp turn, a clear upheaval, a moment you could point to and say, that was when everything changed. But I am not bound by the need to display what I am doing. I favor changes so deep that they require no performance. I work the way a tree grows in stable weather. There is no sound when the roots go deeper. There is no audience when the trunk thickens. Yet it is precisely what no one sees that keeps the tree standing when strong winds come. You grow impatient because you have waited a long time. You want to see results so you can be reassured that what is happening within you is real. But I am teaching you a different rhythm. This rhythm does not excite you immediately, but it will not betray you in the long run. You are learning to slow down without believing you are falling behind. You begin to understand that slow is not the same as stagnant, and stillness is not the same as death. In a stable climate, the most essential things are formed. I tell you that strength which does not need to be displayed is lasting strength, and change that does not need to prove itself is change that has taken root. As you allow this rhythm to lead you, patience begins to replace your familiar restlessness. not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you no longer need them immediately in order to keep walking. You learn to trust without having to hold everything tightly in your hands. And in that trust, you begin to notice a very quiet sign of the new season. You no longer demand that I speak loudly. You no longer need jarring signals to know that you are being led. You begin to hear me in very small nudges, gentle promptings that carry no pressure. At times, it is nothing more than a thought that brightens briefly and then settles again, very gentle, very undramatic. At other times, it is a sense of rightness that is difficult to explain, accompanied neither by excitement nor by fear. You used to ignore these signs because you believed guidance had to arrive with thunder. But I tell you that when the pressure within your soul has been lowered, you no longer need loud sounds. You recognize what is right as a soft light, one that does not dazzle the eyes, but is sufficient for you to know where to place your foot. This gentle light does not urge you to run. It does not frighten you if you do not step forward immediately. It simply remains there, patient, waiting until you are ready. And what surprises you is that when you follow these small nudges, you do not feel that you are losing control. You feel that you are being held. You no longer have to argue violently within yourself in order to move forward. You no longer have to force yourself to believe. You simply begin to notice a quiet harmony between where I am leading and what your soul is able to carry. I know you are used to thinking that what matters must be loud, unmistakable, impossible to deny. But in this season, I am teaching you a different language. This language is not built on intensity, but on safety. When your soul no longer has to stay on guard, you hear me more clearly, even when I speak softly. When you no longer require a dramatic shift in OE in order to believe, you realize that I have been there all along, working deeply, steadily, and very near. Peace does not come to weaken you. It comes so that you no longer have to live as though you are always about to be attacked. As you gradually grow accustomed to stillness, the initial fear dissolves, making room for a trust that is slow but sure. You do not need to rush to prove that a new season has begun. The very fact that you can remain in this quiet without panicking is the clearest sign that the climate within you is changing, and that I am attending to you not to test you, but to keep you within a safety deep enough for all that I will continue to lead you into. I want you to remain a little longer in this slower rhythm, because this is often where doubt is born. When there is no obvious shift, no upheaval large enough for you to point to and say, God has acted, you begin to wonder whether everything has come to a standstill. You have been accustomed to confirming my presence through intensity, strong emotions, major decisions, decisive turning points. So when I lead you through a stretch where everything appears ordinary, you grow restless. You want results so that you can be reassured. You want a sign clear enough that you do not have to wait. But I tell you that I do not need dramatic shifts to prove that I am at work. I do not act to satisfy your need to see. I act to protect the long-term life within you. You do not realize how quickly many of the things you once called breakthroughs exhausted you. They arrived powerfully and suddenly overwhelmed you, and then required you to strain in order to maintain them. I do not condemn those seasons. I simply show you that they are not the only way I work. In this season, I am doing something different. I am nourishing you in stable weather. I use the image of a tree not to create a pleasing picture, but to help you understand a deep law of life. A tree does not need noise to grow. It needs soil that is healthy enough, water that is consistent, and light that is allowed to last. Roots go deep in silence. The trunk thickens during days no one notices. And when the wind comes, it is those long seasons of stability that keep the tree standing. You have been used to thinking that if there is no major movement, you are being left behind. But I tell you that stability is not stagnation. Stability is the condition in which lasting life is formed. I do not need you to constantly feel that you are advancing in order for me to work. I need you to be safe enough not to sabotage what I am building through your own impatience. Your restlessness does not come from a lack of faith, but from having waited too long in unhealthy climates. So when I bring you into a stable climate, you do not yet trust that this, too, is a process. You believe that slowness is dangerous. But I tell you that there are things that only grow when they are not pushed. I see you trying to listen, yet there is still a whisper within you that says, if you do not do something significant, you will miss your moment. You fear that this slowness will cause you to lose something important. I tell you that my timing does not slip because you do not run. My timing is preserved by order, not by speed. I do not place weighty things on a foundation that is not yet secure. I do not lead you into strong winds when your roots are not yet deep enough. What I am doing is not showy, but it is exact. And precisely because it is not showy, it calls for trust more than excitement. Within this stable climate, you begin to learn something that has always been very difficult for you. Patience is not endurance, but alignment. You are not gritting your teeth to wait. You remain. You live in today without treating it as an obstacle to tomorrow. You do your part without demanding that it immediately produce a visible outcome. And strangely, when you stop forcing the process, your inner world is no longer as tight as it once was. You still hope, but hope no longer makes you contract. You still wait, but waiting no longer turns you bitter. I tell you that this is the sign of a trust that is being formed, not one built on immediate evidence, but on relationship. You begin to realize that this unshowy strength is unlike anything you have previously called strength. It does not make you feel invincible. It makes you feel able to stay with an unfinished process, to stay with a question that has no answer yet, to stay with a life that is still incomplete without despising yourself. I call this enduring strength. It does not excite you, but it does not betray you when difficulty stretches on. And it is precisely this kind of strength that is able to carry what I will entrust to you in the coming season. I do not ask you to stop expecting. I simply invite you to stop demanding that the process unfold in the way you are accustomed to. When you stop looking for a dramatic shift to feel secure, you begin to see that I have been there all along, working steadily, carefully, deeply. You do not need to see a tree grow every day to know it is alive. You only need to trust that the climate I have placed you in is not accidental. It has been chosen to suit the life I am nurturing within you. When you allow yourself to remain in this climate long enough, a new patience takes shape, not one born of suppression, but of trust that I have not forgotten you, nor am I delayed. I am not postponing to test you. I am stabilizing to protect you. And in that stability, you begin to sense that even without loud sounds, even without visible signs, what I am doing is real, is deep, and cannot be taken away. You do not need to hurry to prove that I am at work. The very fact that you can live, breathe, and grow within this steady rhythm is already evidence that I am leading you in a way you have never learned before, but are slowly beginning to trust. I want you to notice the final sign of this season, a sign that is easily overlooked because it does not impress. You begin to hear me in small nudgings, not in thunderous commands, not in urgings that make your heart race, but in impulses that are very gentle, very near arriving and then settling, like a soft light touching the inside. You once thought that if it were me, it would have to be unmistakably clear. You did not realize that such clarity often comes with pressure. And pressure is no longer the language I use with you in this season. I do not need to shout for you to hear. When the inner climate has been lowered, a light touch is enough. You recognize this in very ordinary moments. A passing thought that you should pause and not send that message right away. A faint sense that you should choose silence instead of explanation. A quiet impulse to go to bed earlier. Eat more slowly. Respond less. These things do not excite you. They do not frighten you either. They simply carry a very gentle sense of rightness, hard to articulate, yet sufficient that you no longer have to argue with yourself for very long. I tell you that this is an important sign. When you no longer need thunder to discern right from wrong, it means your soul has become less noisy. Before, every small decision pulled you into a spiral of analysis. You weighed, compared, predicted, and persuaded yourself to the point of exhaustion, not because the decision was difficult, but because there were too many voices within you. The voice of fear of being wrong, the voice of concern about being judged, the voice of fear of missing out. Those voices made you believe that without tension, you would not choose correctly. But now, as I lead you through small nudgings, you realize that decisions no longer feel as heavy. You are not absolutely certain, but you are no longer torn in two. You step forward without forcing yourself to believe. You simply recognize that a gentle light is indicating the way. I want you to understand that this light is entirely different from excitement. Excitement propels you forward with intense energy, but it fades quickly. Gentle light does not push you. It stands there and waits for you. It does not make you feel exceptional. It makes you feel rightly placed. You once believed that without strong feelings, you must be going the wrong way. But in this season, I am teaching you that the sense of right is often very quiet. It does not make you boast. It does not make you want to prove anything. It simply allows you to breathe more deeply as you walk. At times you doubt these nudgings because they are so small. You fear that you are imagining them, that you are being lazy, that you are choosing the easy path. But I tell you that the easy path is not always peaceful. Many easy paths sustain you through avoidance. The path I indicate, though gentle, still requires your presence. It asks you to face yourself without using noise as a cover. These small nudgings do not pull you away from reality. They draw you deeper into it. They do not give you the feeling of quick victory. They give you the feeling of standing firm. I see you beginning to trust this not through reasoning, but through experience. You follow a small nudging, and no disaster occurs. You choose to slow down a little, and the world does not collapse. You refrain from reacting immediately, and the relationship does not fall apart as you once feared. Each time, an old layer of fear peels away. You realize that I do not always lead you out of danger through grand movements. Often, I lead you simply by keeping you from harming yourself again. In this rhythm, you begin to hear me more clearly, not because I speak louder, but because you are quieter. You no longer need to force yourself to pray long enough to hear. You no longer need to create a special atmosphere for me to appear. I am there in very ordinary choices, in things no one sees. In moments where you do not need to prove anything, you begin to realize that guidance is no longer an event, but a state. I do not come and go. I remain. Something very deep is happening that you only sense over time. You are beginning to trust gentleness. You once trusted strength, urgency, intensity. Now you are beginning to believe that what comes from me does not need to make you tense in order to be real. This changes the way you live. You no longer seek shocking signs. You no longer need to be constantly driven. You begin to recognize that if something requires you to panic in order to act, it may not be from me. I tell you that the new season will be recognized not by having more stories to tell, but by having less need to defend yourself. You hear me in small nudgings because your soul is secure enough not to require loudness. You no longer need me to prove power through dramatic turns, because you have seen that power in the way I have kept you from breaking. You walk in gentle light, and it is precisely that gentleness that lets you know you are no longer being led by fear, but by relationship. I am not in a hurry to take you farther right now. I remain with you in this quiet rhythm, so you can grow accustomed to being led without being jolted. You will still hear me speak, but in this way more often without noise, without pressure, without display. And when you realize that you can live, choose, and continue in this gentle light, you will understand that the new season has truly begun, not out there, but right here, in the way you listen to me and respond each day. I see the inner struggle you have carried for far too long, and I name it plainly so you will no longer think you are weak because of it. Struggle is the most draining kind of battle, not because it is loud, but because it splits you in two. One part of you wants to move forward, another part pulls you back. One part of you knows what is right, another part fears the cost of what is right. And each time fear is triggered, you pull yourself back into the past as a survival reflex. I do not scold you for that reflex. It once kept you alive, but I invite you to stop using it in this season, because it is tearing you apart. Each time you fear loss, you return to what is familiar, even though it has wounded you. Each time you fear being misunderstood, you slip back into old roles to be accepted. Each time you fear standing alone, you pull yourself back into relationships that no longer carry life. Each time you fear failure, you return to old ways. Even though they have exhausted you, I see this chain of each time within you, like an endless loop, and I tell you that this very loop is what is draining you, not because you are not strong enough to move forward, but because you are expending your strength, pulling yourself backward every time you are about to step ahead. There are days when you feel numb, when you no longer want to choose anything. You do not feel like resisting, nor do you have the strength to fight. You call it burnout, but I see it as your soul growing weary from being torn for too long. You no longer cry loudly, you just feel empty. And in that emptiness, tears break through unexpectedly, not because of something dramatic, but because you can no longer hold yourself together. I am not distant in that moment. I gather you back, not with explanations, but with a presence close enough that you no longer have to hold yourself alone. I tell you that I am not gathering you so you become harder, but so you stop being divided. Only when you are no longer pulled in opposite directions can you walk without tearing yourself apart. I do not demand that you become decisive overnight. I simply invite you to see this each time you return to the past merely to avoid fear. You are paying with your own wholeness. I do not condemn you for having done so. I show you the cost so you no longer keep paying it unconsciously. You believed that choosing would destroy love. You feared that if you chose, you would hurt someone, lose connection, be labeled selfish. You were taught that love means opening, yielding, enduring. But I teach you something deeper. Love without form becomes manipulation, no matter how pure the intention. When you have no boundaries, You do not love from freedom, you love from fear. And loving from fear always makes you smaller. I tell you that boundaries do not kill love. They give love a form, so it does not dissolve into pity. You have confused pity with love. Pity holds others through guilt. Love holds others through truth. When you are afraid to choose truth, you think you are protecting love, but in reality you are allowing it to be distorted. I invite you to speak truth in love, not to win. But so love does not have to survive on ambiguity. When you begin to understand this, guilt rises sharply within you. You fear loss. You fear abandonment. You fear that if you stand upright, you will stand alone. I am there as that fear passes through you. I do not deny it. I show you that loss from speaking truth is different from loss from continuing to live against yourself. One hurts because you are honest. The other hurts because you betray yourself every day. I tell you that I do not protect you from every loss, but I protect you from losing yourself. And when you choose truth, even with a trembling voice, even with weak hands, you begin to feel a very unfamiliar strength. Not the strength to overpower, but the strength to stand without collapsing. I tell you that you do not need to win through explanation. You are exhausted from justifying yourself. You have sent long messages simply to prove that you are not cruel, not wrong, not careless. You have explained until you lost your breath. I tell you that a new season begins when you stop explaining, not because you are more right, but because you no longer need defense in order to exist. You walk with quiet conviction, not with walls made of words. Gentleness does not mean weakness. Gentleness is when you no longer have to strain to hold your boundaries. Gentleness is when you say no without trembling explanations. Gentleness is when you choose silence, not out of fear, but because you no longer need to prove anything. You thought that if you did not explain, you would lose. But I show you a paradox, gentle, yet strong. You do not need to win arguments in order to keep walking. You only need to stand in what you know is true. When you stop struggling against yourself, a firm lightness begins to settle within you. Not the lightness of avoidance, but the lightness of a soul no longer pulled in opposite directions. You no longer have to exert energy just to stay intact. You walk not faster, but straighter. You no longer feel that you are betraying someone each time you choose what is right. And in this new wholeness, I am very near, not pushing you forward, not pulling you back, simply walking with you in a rhythm that no longer requires you to tear yourself apart to follow. I want you to keep watching what unfolds after you stop struggling, because this is the place where you are most tempted to return to old habits. When you stop pulling yourself in two directions, a space opens up. That space is quiet, but it unsettles you. You have lived in division for so long that when everything begins to gather into one, you do not know what to do with the energy that has been released. You once used it to worry, to explain, to turn back, to keep everything from falling apart. Now, as I hold you in a single direction, you feel both lighter and emptier. And that very emptiness makes you fear that you are being irresponsible, that you are letting go too much, that you are no longer fighting hard enough. I tell you that this is a very delicate stage, not because you are weak, but because you are withdrawing from a way of living. You were accustomed to tension as proof of existence. So when the tension recedes, you think you are disappearing. But I tell you that you are not disappearing. You are returning to a state you had forgotten, the state of being gathered. When you no longer have to pull yourself back into the past every time you are afraid, you begin to feel more clearly what is present now. And the present, though quieter, asks you to face more. with no division left to hide behind. You must remain with your real emotions. At times, what you feel is not peace, but sorrow. Sorrow because you realize you stayed in the wrong relationships for too long. Sorrow because you see how many years you traded away to keep the peace. Sorrow because you understand that not everything you endured was love. I do not rush to remove this sorrow. I allow it to remain, because it does not come to destroy you, but to gather the parts of you that were left behind. When you allow yourself to be sorrowful without returning to patch up the past, you begin to cry in a different way, not tears of helplessness, but tears that come from finally stopping the betrayal of what you know to be true. I am there with you when you fear that choosing rightly will leave you alone. You once lived by keeping everyone close, even if it meant making yourself smaller. Now, as you no longer pull yourself back into places where there is no life, you feel the emptiness very clearly. I do not deny that some people will no longer walk with you, but I tell you this, their not walking with you does not mean you loved wrongly. It simply means you are no longer using pity to hold a relationship together. When you choose truth, relationships built on manipulation reveal themselves, and that exposure, though painful, is part of how I protect you. I want you to see clearly the difference between defensiveness and conviction. Defensiveness always comes with tension, always braced for the next blow. Conviction is quieter, because it does not need to win in order to exist. You have lived in defensiveness for so long that when you begin to walk in gentle conviction, you worry that you are becoming weak. But I show you that strength is not found in how much you explain, but in your ability to stand in what you know is right without having to justify yourself. You no longer send long messages to explain your motives. You no longer try to make everyone fully understand. You say what is enough, or you say nothing, and it no longer makes you tremble. There are moments when you still want to return to the old ways, not because you do not trust me, but because the old ways are familiar. They give you a sense of control. Yet every time you are about to go back, you realize something very clearly. If you return, you will have to tear yourself apart again. This realization does not come as a command, but as a deeply physical knowing. You feel tired just thinking about explaining. You feel heavy, imagining yourself pulling back toward the past. And that very heaviness helps you stop, not because you are strong, but because you are tired enough to no longer wound yourself. I tell you that I am not gathering you into one so that you become hard, but so that you become real. When you are no longer divided, you do not need to remember what you said to whom in order to maintain an image. You do not need to keep adjusting yourself. You can be one in your words, in your choices, in your presence. This integrity does not make you more impressive, it makes you less tangled. And in being less tangled, you have more strength for what truly matters. You begin to see that the constant inner tug of war drained you, not only because it was exhausting, but because it never allowed you to fully be anywhere. When you stayed with the past, you could not fully live the present. When you looked at the future through fear, you could not fully live today. Now, as I gather you into one, you begin to inhabit each moment more fully. Not every moment is easy, but it is no longer torn apart. You can be sad without panicking. You can choose without hating yourself. You can say no without feeling cruel. I know you are still learning, and I am not pushing you toward perfection. I am simply holding you in the truth that you no longer need to struggle in order to survive. You have already survived. Now I am teaching you how to live. And living, in this season, is no longer a tug of war between fear and knowing, between love and pity. between defensiveness and conviction. Living is walking in one direction with your whole self undivided, unfractured, not because everything is resolved, but because you have stopped fighting yourself. I want you to look at this very subtle moment, the moment you begin to walk without tearing yourself, and precisely because of that. The moment when doubt most easily creeps in, when the inner struggle quiets. You no longer hear two opposing voices pulling at you, and that stillness feels both light and exposed. You no longer have an excuse to delay, nor the familiar excuse to return to the past. You stand there more alone, more clear, and therefore more vulnerable. You once thought struggle was weakness, but now you discover a harder truth: struggle can also be a hiding place. It gives you a reason not to step fully into where I am leading you. I tell you that when you stop struggling, you begin to see clearly what you truly believe. When you were divided, you could blame inner conflict, but once you are gathered into one, every choice becomes clearer, and that clarity frightens you. You fear that if you choose wrongly, there will be no one to blame but yourself. You fear that if you choose what is right, you will have to accept consequences that you once avoided through hesitation. I see that fear clearly, and I do not fault you for it. I simply tell you that here is where true maturity begins, not through hardness, but through gentle responsibility. You have lived in defensiveness for too long. Defensiveness gives the illusion of control, though in reality, it only keeps you tense. When you let go of defensiveness, you are no longer prepared for every imagined attack, and that makes you feel exposed. But I tell you that emptiness is not danger. Emptiness is space for me to draw nearer. When you no longer rehearse explanations in your mind, when you no longer draft rebuttals before anyone has even asked, you begin to live in presence. Presence does not give you a sense of power, but it gives you a sense of truth. I know you once believed that if you did not explain enough, you would be misunderstood, judged, abandoned, but I am letting you experience something different. There are moments when you remain silent and not everyone understands you, yet you remain standing. There are moments when you speak very little, and you no longer feel as though you are disappearing for lack of recognition. Each time, an old layer of fear falls away. You realize that you do not need to win with words in order to exist. You do not need to control how others see you in order to move forward. I tell you that this is gentle strength, and it runs far deeper than the strength of argument. You begin to see clearly the difference between explaining to connect and explaining to defend yourself. Before, you often confused the two. You explained endlessly, believing you were loving, while deep inside you were afraid. When you stop justifying yourself, you do not become cold, you become more precise. You choose to speak when needed, and to remain silent when words would only be armor. This does not happen all at once. Sometimes you still type a long message, then delete it. Sometimes you still want to add one more sentence to make sure you are not misunderstood. Then you stop, not by force, but because you recognize that if you speak further, you will betray the peace that has just begun to form. I am there in those moments of stopping. I do not urge you into silence by sheer willpower. I simply let you feel something very clearly in your body when you speak from defensiveness. Your chest tightens when you speak from conviction. Your breath remains open. You learn to trust this small signal, not to be perfect, but to avoid hurting yourself again. And gradually, you realize that you can stand in a choice without building a fence of words around it. There is a very particular lightness that appears when you stop struggling altogether. It is not lightness because problems are gone, but lightness because you are no longer divided within. You no longer have to persuade one part of yourself to fight against another. You no longer live in the state of being right, yet heavy. You take a step, and that step carries weight, but it does not tear you apart. I tell you that this is the sign that you are moving from wholeness, not from fear. And wholeness is not loud, but it is enduring. You begin to realize that the new season does not require you to become someone else. It requires you to stop resisting the person you are becoming. When you no longer pull yourself back into the past every time fear rises, you are able to remain in the present long enough for me to lead you forward. You no longer need to keep turning around to check whether you have lost someone. I am not saying that you will lose nothing. I am saying that you will no longer lose yourself. And that has been my intention from the beginning. I know that you still have moments of wavering. I do not demand that you be steady like stone immediately. I simply keep you in this truth: you do not need to struggle anymore in order to be safe. Your safety does not rest in hesitation. It rests in belonging to me. When you walk with gentle conviction, you do not walk alone. I am there, not pushing, not pulling, only holding you, so that you no longer have to tear yourself apart in order to move forward. And in that rhythm, whether slow or fast, you begin to live as a whole person, not because you have won, but because you have stopped fighting yourself. I want you to linger here long enough that you do not miss something easily. Misunderstood, the miracle I am working in you does not begin with circumstances. It begins with how you are within those circumstances. You have been used to thinking that if I am truly acting, your external life must change. First, your work, your relationships, your pace, your pressures. But I tell you that the deeper miracle is not that loud. The miracle is that you remain in the same life, yet that life no longer consumes you. The things that once suffocated you no longer hold the same power, not because they disappeared, but because I have reset you from the inside. You begin to recognize this in a very unexpected way. There is no dramatic turn, no spectacular sign. You still wake up in the same room, still face familiar responsibilities, still live within relationships that are not fully resolved. And yet something is clearly different. You are no longer swept away as before. Situations that once overwhelmed you now simply cause you to pause. Words that once provoked you now brush past and fade. You are surprised by yourself, because you never thought it was possible to remain in the same setting without being torn apart. I tell you that this is precisely the miracle, not a change of scene, but a change of the one who stands within it. I tell you that if you are in me, you are a new creation. That newness does not always show itself through a completely different outward life. Often it shows itself in the fact that you no longer react the same way. You are no longer pulled into familiar spirals. You no longer have to fight in order to survive. I do not remove you from this life to protect you. I make you steady enough to remain in it without being consumed. And when you recognize this, a very quiet tenderness passes through you, not excitement at receiving something great, but the deep sense of being held. You begin to feel gratitude rising in places you did not expect, not because everything has become good, but because you are no longer carried away as before. You are grateful that you can stay with a difficult emotion without panicking. You are grateful that you can hear unwelcome news without collapsing. You are grateful that you can breathe deeply in the middle of a busy day without feeling as though you are about to break. I tell you that this gratitude is the sign that you are standing on a different foundation, not the foundation of control, but the foundation of being reset from within. I tell you that I am not only changing you, I am changing how you respond. Before, your pattern was clear: panic first, pray later. You reacted from fear, then came to me to patch together what had already shattered. You prayed when it was already too late not to panic. But in this season, I am teaching you a new rhythm. You pray, then you choose, not always by kneeling in form, but your soul learns to turn toward me before deciding. You interrupt the old reflex. You no longer allow fear to drive you into choices and then ask me to repair the aftermath. You notice this difference in very small details. You no longer scroll mindlessly to numb yourself. You no longer exhaust yourself trying to anticipate what others think. You no longer rush to respond just to escape discomfort. There are brief moments when you pause just long enough to breathe, just long enough to ask within, where am I in this? And that brief interruption changes the entire direction. I tell you that peace is no longer a reward that comes after everything is settled. Peace becomes the rhythm that carries you through while things are still unsettled. This new rhythm does not slow you down in the way you fear. It makes you clearer. You no longer have to run in circles fixing as many mistakes as before. You no longer waste energy putting out fires caused by old reflexes. I place a pause between stimulus and response. And within that pause, you begin to live differently, not because you control better, but because you are no longer immediately dragged along. I call this the quiet miracle of a soul that has been reset. I tell you that what I am doing is not only in your soul, I am restoring you as an integrated whole. Your body, mind, and spirit have been separated for too long. You used exhaustion to prove your faithfulness. You believed that if you were still tired, you were still trying. But I tell you that I do not need your exhaustion to trust you. I give you strength sufficient for today not to display, but to live. That strength does not crash in like a wave. It seeps in like groundwater beneath the earth. You feel this very tangibly in your body. Not every day do you feel strong, but you are no longer depleted as before. When you are tired, you know you are tired without despising yourself. When you need rest, you rest without guilt tearing you apart. I am replenishing you at a steady pace without overwhelming you, without addicting you to intensity. Like a device charged properly, you do not burn out, but you do not shut down. I tell you that those who wait on me will renew their strength, not strength to perform, but strength to continue without breaking. This restoration warms you from the inside, not warmth from excitement, but warmth from flow. You no longer have to gather the last scraps of energy just to get through the day. You begin to have strength for small things, listening, being present, choosing what is right without forcing yourself. I am not returning you to a life without fatigue. I am returning you to a life that is no longer consumed by fatigue. And this is the great difference you are learning to name. I tell you that this inner miracle does not separate you from life. It places you within life rightly. You no longer live on the edge of yourself. You no longer have to expend all your strength simply to exist each day. You live, and that life no longer demands payment in the form of yourself. I reset you not so that you escape life, but so that you can remain in life while still belonging to me. And as you stand more firmly in this, you no longer need to convince anyone that I have worked a miracle. You know, you feel it, you live differently, and that difference quiet, unassuming, unadvertised is enough for you to know that I have changed the operating system within you, so that you can live the same life without being consumed by it. I continue to lead you to remain within this miracle a little longer, because this is the place where you are most likely to slip back into old ways without realizing it. When the pressures of external life are still present and familiar, you easily begin to doubt whether the change within you is only temporary. You wonder whether you are merely soothing yourself, whether this peace will hold when another difficult situation arises. I tell you that this doubt does not make you worse. It simply shows that you are learning to live by a new operating system. And a new system needs time to replace reflexes that have been deeply ingrained. Before, when something unexpected happened, your reaction was almost automatic. Your heart raced. Your mind surged ahead. You imagined the worst-case scenarios. And only afterward did you turn to me, already tangled and overwhelmed. You prayed as a form of emergency response, not as a place of dwelling. I do not blame you for that. You survived harsh seasons by living that way. But I tell you that, in this season, I am restoring the order, not to make you passive, but to free you from being driven by old reflexes. You pray before you react. You return to me before you decide. And it is precisely this very small reversal that changes the entire rhythm of your life. You notice this not in major events, but in very ordinary moments. A message arrives, and you do not open it immediately. A remark touches you, and you do not respond at once. A negative thought arises, and you do not rush to believe it. You pause briefly, but long enough for your soul to return to its proper place. I am there in that pause. I do not give you a long explanation. I give you a calm clarity. You no longer have to guess which reaction will best protect you. Peace begins to take on the role of guide. I tell you that when peace becomes your rhythm, you no longer live by repairing damage after the fact. You do not have to undo as much because you no longer rush forward as you once did. You save an enormous amount of strength, not because life is lighter, but because you are no longer making it heavier through old reactions. You find yourself apologizing less for overreactions, explaining less because of misunderstandings born of haste, cleaning up fewer fragments created by fear, taking the lead. I call this a very practical miracle. Even if no one names it as such, there are still moments when you are swept along. I am not surprised. I am not disappointed. I simply allow you to notice the difference more quickly. You recognize that when you react in the old way, your body becomes tired almost immediately. When you choose the new rhythm, even if the situation is unresolved, your heart remains open. You begin to trust this signal, not as a rigid rule, but as a gentle compass. You learn to discern what is being led, and what is merely reflex. I tell you that I am restoring you as a unified process, not in fragments. Before, you tried to care for your soul through prayer while neglecting your body and forcing your mind to work without rest. You believed the spiritual was separate from the physical. But I tell you that I created you whole. When your body is exhausted, your soul is affected. When your mind is overloaded, you cannot hear me clearly. So, in this season, I am not touching only your faith. I am touching how you sleep, how you eat, how you rest, how you allow yourself to stop. You see this more clearly than ever. There are days when you accomplish less than before, yet you no longer condemn yourself. There are moments when you need to rest halfway through, and you no longer call it failure. I am removing from you the belief that exhaustion is proof of faithfulness. I give you strength sufficient for today, not so that you can display your power, but so that you can live this day fully without being drained. You begin to understand that the strength I give is not for doing everything, but for doing what is necessary with a soul that remains intact. I use the image of a spring of water to help you understand this. I do not pour water violently to overwhelm you. I let it seep steadily, continuously, enough to keep the ground from cracking. You are accustomed to heavy emotional downpours arriving fast, retreating quickly. leaving the soil drier than before. Now I give you a steady flow. You are not euphoric, but you are not dry. You do not surge upward, but you do not break. And it is precisely this steady flow that restores you most deeply. At times, you compare yourself to others and feel that you are moving slowly. I tell you that you are not slow. You are moving at the right pace for healing. Those who run fast on exhaustion may pass you for a while, but they do not remain standing. I am not racing you against anyone. I place you in a rhythm where body, mind, and spirit can move together. When these three no longer pull against one another, you gain a new kind of strength, quiet, but enduring. I see you beginning to warm again. Not warm because everything is going well, but because you are no longer living in depletion. You have strength to listen to others without being drained. You have strength to remain with yourself without fleeing. You have strength to choose what is right without forcing yourself. I tell you that this is the sign of true restoration, not restoration for conquest, but restoration for living. You begin to understand that the miracle I am working is not meant to remove you from this life, but to allow you to remain within it without being defined by it. Life no longer consumes you because you no longer have to fight life with yourself. I reset you not so that you can avoid the wind, but so that you can stand within it without breaking. And when you realize this, your heart moves from initial astonishment into a steady gratitude. Gratitude that you no longer have to pay with yourself in order to survive. Gratitude that you are allowed to live, not merely endure. I tell you that this process is still ongoing. I am not in a hurry. I am not pulling you along. I replenish you each day with what is sufficient for that day. And as you live by this rhythm, you will see that the inner miracle is not merely an emotional phase, but a new foundation for your entire life. You live the same life, yet it no longer consumes you, because I have changed the operating system within you, and I will continue to keep it running through my steady presence. Day by day, I want you to look closely at this final change, because it is easily overlooked once you are accustomed to seeking miracles in louder places. You begin to realize that this new operating system does not make you feel higher, but makes you more durable. You no longer live in cycles of flare-ups followed by collapse. You no longer borrow tomorrow's energy to survive today. I place within you a rhythm slow enough to keep you from burning yourself out, and steady enough to keep you from running dry. This does not make you feel extraordinary, but it allows you to remain whole at the end of each day, and that is what you have been missing for a very long time. There are mornings when you wake up without any particular sense of excitement. In the past, this would have frightened you. You would think you were growing cold, slipping backward, losing your fire. But now you recognize something different. You are not empty. You do not need to activate yourself with anxiety to begin the day. You do not need to force yourself into a state of readiness for battle. You simply get up, and within you there is enough strength to do today's portion. I tell you that this is not the cooling of faith, but its stabilization. The fire no longer flares up and overwhelms you. It burns steadily, warm enough for you to live. You begin to sense this miracle most clearly in moments where you used to collapse. Something does not go as planned, and you do not fall into free fall as before. A word touches you, and you do not slam shut. A long, exhausting day passes, and you do not condemn yourself for not being productive enough. I do not remove all difficulty. I change how difficulty reaches you. It no longer pierces straight into your core. It stops at the surface, and you have space to breathe. That space is where I am not to isolate you from life, but so that life no longer has the power to crush you. I tell you that when body, mind, and spirit begin to function together, you no longer have to sacrifice one part to save another. You do not need to exhaust your body for your soul to feel faithful. You do not need to strain your mind to prove that you are serious. I give you strength enough for today, and that strength arrives exactly where it is needed. When you need clarity, I give you clarity. When you need rest, I give you permission. When you need to move forward, I give you steadiness. You no longer have to ration your strength through fear. I am distributing it through very precise care. At times you notice that you no longer boast about how tired you are. Before, exhaustion was a quiet badge of honor. Being tired proved that you had tried. Now you no longer need that badge. You do not need others to see how much you have sacrificed in order to believe you have worth. You live, and that life does not need justification. This feels both strange and light to you. Strange because you are not used to living without having to prove yourself. Light because you are no longer required to tell the story of your exhaustion in order to be recognized. I want you to realize that this is where many people turn back, because stability does not give them the feeling of something is happening. But I tell you that this very stability is the foundation for what lasts. You are no longer living by constant resistance. You are living by steady replenishment, like a water vein that does not surface yet keeps the soil from cracking. I am keeping you moist from the inside. You are no longer as thirsty as before. You no longer need emotional storms to survive. You have water enough for each day. As you look back, you begin to see clearly the difference between surviving and living. Before, you moved through your days by bracing yourself. Now, you move through your days by being present. You no longer have to gather all your strength for the smallest tasks. You have strength to listen without being drained. You have strength to say no without guilt. You have strength to stay with a difficult emotion without needing to shut it down immediately. I tell you that this is the sign that body, mind, and spirit are being restored as one, no longer pulling against each other. You no longer think of miracles as something that must happen outside of you to rescue you. You see the miracle unfolding in the way you live with this life. The same work, the same family, the same limitations, but you are no longer swallowed. You no longer dissolve into roles. You no longer lose yourself in responsibility. I have reset you from the inside, and that resetting is keeping you standing in every circumstance without requiring you to harden. I tell you that this new operating system is not something you must protect through effort. It is sustained by relationship. Each time you turn back to me, even briefly, even quietly, the system is renewed. You do not need to recharge for long. You only need to connect to the right source. And your source is not control, not anxiety, not overexertion. Your source is me, the one who gives new strength to those who trust in him. You do not need to fear that you will return to the old state. If there are moments when you slip, I do not erase the process. One weary step does not cancel a new rhythm of life. What stops the process is not weakness, but returning to old ways of living as a refuge. I am teaching you to recognize this early, so you do not have to wander far before turning back. You are no longer swallowed by life because you no longer use yourself to fight against life. I am there as a firm ground, so you may live, not merely survive. And when you begin to trust this not only on good days but also on ordinary ones, you will see that the inner miracle is not a moment you look back on, but a way of life you are entering. You live the same life, but that life no longer has the authority to define you. Because I have changed the operating system within you. And I am keeping it running through my uninterrupted presence in every breath you take. I do not begin my guidance by giving you more information. I begin by making you less afraid. For as long as you are afraid, no matter how clearly I speak, you will use that clarity to control rather than to trust. You have been used to thinking that clarity is for grasping, for holding, for avoiding surprise. But I tell you that the clarity I give does not come so you can tighten your grip on life. It comes so you can let go without panic. What belongs to me carries peace, not the quiet tension lodged in your chest. You have lived long enough in uncertainty to know the feeling of being pulled in many directions at once. You have listened to many voices, guessed at many paths, and the more you tried to analyze, the more tangled you became. I do not blame you for this. I simply want you to recognize a very gentle sign I consistently use. My voice does not make you tense. When you hear me, you do not have to force yourself to believe. You recognize truth as a light that is just enough, not glaring, not blinding, yet sufficient to quiet your self-doubt. My sheep hear my voice, and that does not require long arguments in your mind. You know not because you are smarter, but because your soul recognizes a familiar rhythm. This kind of clarity is very different from the clarity you once sought. It does not arrive as a detailed plan for many years. It comes as a quiet certainty for the next step. You know what to do next without having to persuade yourself all night. You choose, and inside you, there is no loud resistance. I call this knowing without strain. When you begin to taste this, you are surprised to find that you no longer need to ask so many people for confirmation, not because you have closed yourself off, but because you are being led from within. I tell you that this clarity does not separate you from others. It simply restores order. You no longer need everyone's agreement to be at peace. You no longer need to explain everything in order to be allowed to move forward. What belongs to me will stand firm even without applause, and what does not belong to me, even if it is supported by many, will leave within you a small unease that you have grown used to ignoring. In this season, I am making you calm enough that you no longer overlook that sign. As you begin to gain greater clarity, something else happens alongside it. I begin to show you the people and the pursuits that cannot follow you into the next season. This does not come as a cold checklist. It comes as a growing heaviness each time you try to carry them along. You feel more tired after certain conversations. You sense your heart tightening when you continue certain habits. You have tried to reassure yourself that you should be more generous. Try harder. Keep everything intact. But I tell you, this is not punishment. This is protection. I prune not because you are wrong, but because you are alive. As a gardener cuts away branches that no longer bear fruit, not to wound the tree, but to keep its life from being scattered, so I work in you. You weep when you realize there are relationships you invested in deeply that cannot go on with you. You fear that if you let go, you will lose everything you have built. I do not rush you to release them. I am there as you grieve, as you fear, as you cry over what once comforted you and has now become a burden. I tell you that this pruning does not take life from you. It keeps life from being choked. Some things leave not because they are bad, but because they are no longer in rhythm. You have learned to call every loss a failure. I am teaching you to name some losses as release. When you stop holding on, your hands grow lighter. When your hands are lighter, you are able to receive. You do not need to cut everything away in a single day. I lead you through this pruning with peace, not with force. And little by little, you realize that what remains no longer requires you to divide yourself to carry it. In this process, You learn something essential. I do not lead you in haste. I lead you in order. You once believed that if you did not move quickly, you would miss your chance. But I tell you that the doors I open do not require a sprint. You learn to recognize the door that opens in the right timing. Not every open door is mine. The door of fear demands immediate decisions. Anxious urgency. Dread of delay. My door gives you space to breathe, to discern in peace, to step forward without leaving yourself behind. You begin to distinguish clearly between two kinds of urgency. One makes your heart race with fear of being left behind. The other steadies you with the knowledge that whether you move or pause, I remain with you. I tell you that when you trust me with all your heart and do not rely on your own understanding, I will direct your path. To direct does not mean dragging you forward without choice. It means teaching you when to stop without feeling defeated, and when to go without forcing yourself. You once feared stopping because you believed stopping meant falling behind. But in this season, you learn that stopping at the right time preserves your wholeness. And when you are whole, your next step is far stronger than steps taken in panic. I do not measure your journey by speed. I measure it by faithfulness to the rhythm I give. There are days when you do not go far, but you go rightly. There are decisions you delay, and that very delay saves you from having to turn back repeatedly later. I tell you that the freedom you are entering does not come from having more choices, but from no longer being driven by fear. You recognize a wise door because standing before it does not require you to surrender your peace in order to enter. You do not have to persuade your heart that it will be fine. You step forward, and within you there is a gentle agreement. I am teaching you to walk by peace, not by fear, so that every step you take is not a gamble, but an act of trust. As you walk this way, you begin to see that my guidance does not make you lose yourself. It makes you clearer about who you are. You no longer live in prolonged restlessness. You grow steady, and from that steadiness, you grow courageous. Not the courage of recklessness, but the courage of one who knows they do not walk alone. I do not push you to run. I make you clear, and then I make you firm. And in that firmness, you walk freely not because you control everything, but because you have stopped allowing fear to hold the reins of your life. I want you to remain a little longer in this guidance, because there is a very subtle layer here that, if you do not pass through slowly, you will return to old ways without realizing it. When I begin to make you clear, you may assume that this clarity will make every decision easy. But in truth, my clarity does not remove all external tension. It removes internal fear. And when fear no longer sits in the driver's seat, you begin to realize that you are truly being led, rather than dragging yourself forward. There are moments when you stand before two options that both appear right. In the past, such moments exhausted you. You analyzed. You asked others. You compared, and the more you did so, the farther you drifted from me. But in this season, I am teaching you a different way to discern, not by choosing what carries the least risk, but by listening for what does not require you to trade away your peace. What belongs to me may be difficult, but it does not demand that you tear yourself apart to walk in it. You begin to notice that some paths are very reasonable, widely affirmed by others, yet each time you consider them, your chest grows heavy. Not heavy with responsibility, but heavy with the effort of becoming a version of yourself that does not align with what I am doing within you. Before, you would ignore that signal, calling it weakness or fear. Now, I give you enough stillness not to dismiss it. You do not need to condemn yourself for not choosing the path others consider best. You only need to remain faithful to where I am leading you. I tell you that clarity does not come to spare you from all mistakes. Clarity comes so you no longer live in self-betrayal. When you follow what I show you, you may still face hardship, but you do not carry the added burden of knowing you walked against your inner truth. You walk, and though sweat may fall, your heart does not fracture. I call this steadiness without strain. In this process, I continue to prune, and this time, the pruning does not only occur in major relationships, but in very small details. Habits you once clung to for a sense of safety begin to reveal themselves as unnecessary. You no longer need to stay constantly updated. You no longer need to remain perpetually available to respond. You no longer need to be present in every conversation to feel that you have not been forgotten. Each time you release one of these, you feel a slight sense of loss, but alongside it, a clean emptiness. This emptiness once frightened you. You believed that if it was not filled immediately, you would fall behind. But I tell you that this very emptiness is the space I am holding for new life. Like a branch after pruning, it appears bare for a while, but its life is no longer scattered. You do not need to rush to fill it with new activity, new people, new goals. I am there in that space, keeping you from panic, so you do not return to the things I have gently loosened from your hands. There are moments when you ask me, if I let this go, will I regret it? I do not answer you with a promise that you will never feel sadness. I answer you with my presence. And within that presence, you come to realize that even if sadness comes, you remain standing. Sadness is no longer a sign that you have chosen wrongly. It is simply a sign that you are leaving an old rhythm behind. I do not demand that you be strong immediately. I only invite you to trust that I do not remove anything without preserving what is necessary for your life. As you begin to grow familiar with this rhythm of pruning, you also begin to understand the right time door more deeply. Before, you thought my doors were always large, obvious opportunities, impossible to refuse. But I tell you that many of my doors are quiet. They do not rush you into deciding. They do not make you afraid of missing out. They stand there long enough for you to step through in peace. You do not need to compete with anyone for these doors. If a door is meant for you, it will not close simply because you need more time to listen to me. You start to see that doors born of fear always come with pressure from time. If not now, then never. If you don't take it, someone else will. Those voices once made you tremble. Now you recognize that they are not mine. I do not corner you. I do not place you before a countdown clock to test your faith. I lead you through order, not through haste. At times, this leading requires you to stop while others move ahead. This was once the place where you collapsed, comparing yourself, doubting, fearing you were being left behind. But in this season, when you stop in obedience to my leading, you no longer feel diminished. You feel steadier. You sense that you are no longer being pulled by someone else's rhythm. I tell you that stopping at the right time is not standing still. It is keeping your next step from becoming misaligned. You learn to trust me in decisions no one else sees. There is no applause for the message you do not send. There is no recognition for the invitation you decline. But I see, and I use those quiet decisions to lay the foundation for true freedom. You are no longer reactive to doors that open randomly. You know when to walk through and when to let them pass without explanation. I tell you that when you allow me to lead, you will not always feel certain in the way you are used to, but you will feel at peace. And that peace is different from the certainty of control. It is the peace of one who knows they are being held, even without seeing the whole road ahead. You no longer need to grip the future in order to move forward. You only need to know that this step does not take you away from me. Gradually, you realize something essential. My leading does not shrink your life. It brings your life into order. You no longer chase every possibility. You go deeper into what I place before you. And it is this depth that steadies you, not because you have eliminated all risk, but because you no longer allow fear to decide in your place. I want you to know that this leading will continue. I will keep making you clear, then making you steady, layer by layer. You do not need to force yourself to become someone who hears me well. You only need to remain quiet enough that the voice of fear does not drown out my voice. When you do that, you will find yourself moving not in panic, but in a very real freedom, the freedom of one who is no longer led by fear, because you are walking with me in peace. I want you to enter this new season in a way very different from what you once imagined, not through a grand promise that excites you and then quickly exhausts you, not through a dramatic decision meant to convince yourself that you have turned a page. I seal your new season with things that are very small, very repeated, very ordinary. Each day you choose to stay a little closer to me. Each day you choose to turn your face toward me rather than toward the familiar murmur of fear. Each day you do nothing remarkable, yet you consent to remain. And it is this gentle consent, repeated again and again, that becomes the mark I place upon your new season. You once believed that if you truly had faith, you would always be strong, always certain, always ready. But I tell you that I am not looking for your endurance in emotional highs. I am looking for your endurance in your daily return. Even when you are weak, there are mornings when you wake and nothing in you wants to try harder. You do not feel holier than yesterday. You do not feel further along. Yet you still offer me one very small sentence: I am here. I choose to be closer to you than to the fear whispering in my mind. And that small sentence, though no one else hears it, is sealing your new season more deeply than any declaration ever could. I know there are days when you feel you are not enough, not focused enough, not fervent enough, not persistent enough. Before, such days discouraged you because you thought you were falling behind. But I tell you that this new season is not measured by feelings of strength or weakness. It is held together by dependence. You are weak, yet you lean. You do not strain yourself forward. You rest your weight on me in order to stand. And when you do, something quiet and strange happens. You do not blaze, but you do not break. You do not soar, but you remain upright. I call this a steadiness that can only be born from surrender. There are times when you slip. I am not surprised. I do not withdraw what I am doing because of a misstep. When you slip, I lift you not with rebuke, but by placing my hand beneath you before you fall too far. You recognize this when you look back. There were falls that should have shattered you, yet you only stumbled and were able to stand again, not because you became stronger, but because I was there. I am more faithful than your emotions, and I do not measure my leading by whether you always feel good. There are days when you are too tired to keep the old pace. Before, you would have forced yourself onward, afraid that stopping meant failure. But in this season, I change the rhythm for you. I do not pull you with pressure. I slow down with you. I allow you to rest without stripping away your worth. I let you stop without withdrawing my promise. And in that change of rhythm, you learn something vital. You are not holding on to me by your strength. I am holding on to you by my faithfulness. You once thought faith was a powerful feeling, an unshakable certainty. But I tell you that faith is not a feeling. Faith is remaining when feelings shift. There are days when you do not feel me near, yet you choose not to walk away. There are moments when you do not hear clearly, yet you do not turn your back. I see those choices. I hold each step you take. Even when your step trembles, the righteous may stumble, but they are not cast down, for I hold their hand. You do not need to prove that you are steady. You only need to let me hold you when you are not. I tell you that the peace I give you is not something you must guard through constant vigilance. It is what holds you. When you surrender, you do not abandon responsibility. You release the burden of control. You still live. You still choose. You still move forward, but you no longer carry the fear that one wrong step will cause everything to collapse. I am there adjusting, supporting, guiding you back. And it is the knowing that you are not alone that allows your heart to settle. This new season does not come so that you can display how much you have changed. It comes so that you may live differently quietly. Truly, you do not need to speak much about it. Those who are close to you will recognize it in the way you are present, in the way you no longer react as before, in the way you choose peace even when answers have not yet arrived. I am confirming your new season not through outward signs, but through the steadiness that is growing within you. Thank you for listening to today's message. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so that we may continue together in receiving the living word, building a firm faith, and walking in the boundless love of God. Amen.